I signed where they pointed. Lila angled the pages toward me as if I were a child learning cursive, her smile lacquered and patient. "It's best for everyone, Joe," she said, the steel tucked neatly behind the sugar. My son Daniel sat opposite, elbows on their walnut table, eyes fixed on the pen. I put my name on every line without skimming a sentence, then capped the pen and slid it back. Their relief was almost devotional. "You're transferring Whitaker and Partners to us," Lila recited, tapping each tab as if conducting a hymn. "Dr. Kumar says the stress isn't healthy at your age. You've been forgetful." I folded my hands. I misplaced one dentist appointment because a client's factory exploded. Lila, I remember the explosion. Daniel flinched. "Mom, we want you to relax. Garden, travel, we'll keep you in the house, obviously. But the business, it's complicated." There was a manila folder by Lila's wrist. I recognized the unsubtle bulge of a letter on medical letterhead, and behind it the generic language of a durable power of attorney, tidy scaffolding for a competency petition if I made the wrong kind of noise. The way Lila sipped her wine told me she expected noise. "And if I don't sign?" I asked. Her smile twitched. "We'd hate to involve the court. Those hearings get messy and judges will err on the side of protecting a vulnerable elder. I'm sure you've read the stories." My son didn't meet my eyes. I paid for his bar prep after he failed twice. I taught him the difference between persuasion and coercion, but memory is a selective thing. I set my palm on the paper as if checking for heat and leaned forward to read a line of nothing at all. "Then, let's not make a mess," I said. So I signed, initials, signatures, the small flourishes that make a transfer look ceremonial. When we were done, Lila clapped once quietly. Daniel exhaled. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and tucked the ghost of my company into their neat stack. "Congratulations," I said. "You're now the proud owners of Whitaker and Partners with everything that entails." Lila's brow creased. "Everything" meaning what? "Oh, the usual. Vendor obligations, retainers, the boring bits." I collected my coat. "Do check your email in the morning." The IRS sent a note about a variant something like 3.1 million tied to the pass-through structure. And you may see a letterhead from Kestrel Dynamics. They've been chatty. Color drained from her cheeks with the precision of a dimmer switch. Daniel stood. "What did you do?" "Have a lovely evening," I said, and left their renovated warehouse loft smelling faintly of rosemary and ambition. At 6:47 a.m., my phone drilled through the birdsong. Daniel didn't bother with hello. They're auditing everything back to 220. And Kestrel's counsel emailed at midnight. "There's a demand letter. Breaches damages Mom. What is this?" I stirred cream into my coffee and watched the first light touch the maple outside my kitchen window. "Good morning, sweetheart. Yes, Kestrel can be theatrical. Their plant manager changed twice in a quarter, and they've decided consultants are a convenient mirror. We don't have counsel on retainer," he said, voice pitching up the way it did when he was 16, and reversed our Camry into the mailbox. "And the company account, Mom, there's barely anything liquid. How are we supposed to—" "Daniel," I said gently, "yesterday you told me the business was too complicated for someone my age. It must feel simpler today." Lila's voice bled in from his end, bright and brittle. "Ask her how to fix it. Ask her to fix it." He covered the phone. He didn't cover it well. "We need help." "I'm just an elderly woman with memory issues," I said, and took a sip. "Why would you accept help from someone like that?" Silence. Then the brittle scrape of Lila taking the phone. "You knew," she hissed. "You sat there and let us sign into a disaster. You brought documents to my table, Lila. You selected the venue, the wine, the physician, the narrative. You were thorough." I walked a fingertip along the rim of my mug. "And you were certain. This is fraud. Read your own exhibits," I said. "Look for paragraph 7 disclosures and contingencies. It's dense. You'll enjoy it." She swore softly past the phone back to my son, and somewhere across town, a search bar lit with desperate phrases he'd never imagined typing. "Mom," he said, "smaller now, please. Just tell me what to do." "I have to prune the roses before the heat," I said. "Call a lawyer." I ended the call, set the phone on the counter, and dialed a different number from memory. "Marta," I said when my attorney picked up. "It's Joe. They signed everything last night." A pause. "And this morning?" "They're awake," I said, "and they've finally opened their email." I stood at the sink a while, listening to the house breathe, the kettle clicking as it cooled. In the garden, the first bloom had opened on the pale climbing rose along the fence, a tidy, patient thing. I picked up my shears. They took the bait. By mid-morning, the neighborhood had shaken off its dew. A courier in a windbreaker thumped up my front steps and waited with a rectangular envelope like a small contained fire. "Signature for Ms. Whitaker," he said. "Inside Kestrel Dynamics, outside counsel." Their logo, sharp wings, sharp angles. The letter rehearsed its outrage in expensive sentences: breach of contract, failure to deliver, damages tallied with the meticulousness of a jeweler. 30 days to respond or they would sharpen the quarrel into litigation. I laid the letter on the counter as if it might leap. Then I took out a legal pad and drew 3 columns: facts, postures, remedies, because lists are calmer than fear. The phone started up again. It was the bank, this time CityLine, where Whitaker and Partners' line of credit lived. The relationship manager's voice had the unassailable brightness of someone reading from policy. Ms. Whitaker, we're reviewing new ownership documents. Until our underwriting team completes its diligence, especially given the correspondence from Kestrel, we'll be placing a temporary hold on further draws from the revolver. Meaning the line is frozen, I said. Temporarily, she repeated, which often means not at all. After we hung up, I stepped into the garden and let the cool of the shade sit on my shoulders. The roses looked untroubled. The birds went about their industry. It is a special mercy of living things that they refuse to mirror our panic. By noon, Daniel called again, hoarse. Payroll is next Friday. Without the line where, Mom, can you talk to CityLine? They trust you. You're the owners now, I said. CityLine will need to trust you. There was a beat of air. We didn't plan for this. No, I said, you didn't. When we ended, I dialed Marta. She answered on the second ring. Already saw Kestrel's letter, she said. Their general counsel CC'd me as a courtesy, perhaps to show off their stationery. You could fight it, win it, and still have spent $400,000 doing so. Or we can move the conversation, I said. To where? To implementation, I said, and we both smiled because old conversations have a way of returning like reliable tides. That afternoon, I drove across the bridge to a low-slung building that had once been a canning factory and now wore glass and optimism. The leasing agent was a woman named May with silver hair and a twist, and the even temper of a person who shepherds other people's hopes for a living. What do you need, Joe? She asked after we traded hugs. We'd known each other since Whitaker and Partners rented its first sad suite 2 decades ago. Something honest, I said. Light? Enough space for 8 people and a door that closes when necessary. Month to month to start, and I need it by Monday. She looked at her calendar at me, then back. I have a corner space that a tech startup abandoned at the end of their runway. They left behind a row of desks and a coffee machine with ambitions. The view pretends it's a river. I can pretend too, I said. While she went to find keys, I took a picture out of habit, blank white walls, gray carpet, hopeful windows. I texted it to Marta with 2 words, hold please, and then I stood there a while and tried on the new shape of my days. From the parking lot, I began making calls, each one a stitch, pulling me towards something that looked like a future. Sloan, I said when my project director picked up. How's your mother? Recovering, she said. Why? I'm putting together a small team, different name, same standard. You'd run delivery. A pause, then a long breath. You don't own Whitaker anymore. No, I said, I don't. Is this? She began, then stopped herself. Send me the details. Not a word to anyone until I do, I said. I called Omar Next, our data lead, whose desk always looked like a controlled explosion. Then Geeta from operations, who could have taught clocks about time. Then Ivy, then Benji, then Tamsin and Rafi. Each conversation following the same contour. Here's what I can say. Here's what I can't. Here's what it would mean if you said yes. By 3, Marta had a short-form employment agreement in my inbox that spoke only about wages and at-will status and said nothing at all about Whitaker and Partners. I printed 8 copies and slid them into a manila folder with a new label I'd written in my own hand, Harbor Street Advisory. If you are going to rename your life, choose something sturdy. Your LLC filing will clear overnight, Marta texted. Bank account tomorrow. I've asked an old friend to courier over a laptop or 3. At 4, I emailed Kestrel's CEO directly. We were not strangers. I had in other seasons sat across from him and coaxed his company through snarls of their own making. Subject of practical alternative. Rowan. You are right to be angry. Your last quarter was a mess, and my firm's recommendations didn't repair it. Here's the truth: you already know your managers never implemented those recommendations. You rotated leadership twice in a quarter and lost your operations lead to Arclight. Of course, nothing took root. Suing Whitaker and Partners will win you an emblem and cost you a year. Instead, meet me tomorrow. I will bring the emails you've forgotten and a proposal that buys you results rather than headlines. Joe. He responded at 5:12 with the precision of a person who counts. 9:00 a.m., Thursday, conference level. That evening, I drove 2 blocks from the would-be office to a copy shop that also sold bubble tea. I printed a thin book of exhibits, the original statement of work, status reports signed by Kestrel's own managers, emails in which my team politely and repeatedly had begged for access approvals, and a decision that never came. The clerk slid the bound stack to me and asked if I wanted a colored cover. Something that says calm, I said. She chose a soft blue. It helped. On Thursday, Kestrel's headquarters elevated itself out of the warehouse district like a ship. The lobby had a wall of glass and a receptionist who wore the expression of someone who has seen every variety of self-importance pass under her gaze. Rowan met me himself. He was a tall man, gone slightly to seed the way successful people do when they stop running towards something and start standing still. He shook my hand in a manner that was deliberate without being friendly. Ms. Whitaker, he said. I've been told you no longer speak for Whitaker and Partners. I don't, I said. Today I speak for myself. We sat in a conference room overlooking a square of ornamental grass trying to be a courtyard. His general counsel, a woman named Yvonne with immaculate posture, occupied one end of the table. A junior attorney with a new haircut sat near the wall and kept very tidy notes. We hired you for outcomes, Yvonne began as if reciting the house prayer. You delivered documents. I slid the blue book toward her. Page 14, I said. Your operations team signed off on our implementation plan in week 5. Page 19 shows the access requests that sat unanswered for 6 weeks. Page 23 is your VP's email declining to establish a steering committee because, quote, everyone is busy and we're not a Fortune 50. Rowan flipped pages without ceremony. The junior attorney's pen clicked twice and then stopped. Your point, Yvonne said, though her voice had slipped a half tone. My point is that you did not buy a miracle, I said. You bought an analysis and a path. You then ignored the path and are now suing the mapmaker for the blisters you earned walking in circles. Rowan's mouth tightened, either a smile or a restraint. What are you offering, Joe? Withdraw the demand letter against Whitaker and Partners, I said. Then engage my new firm, Harbor Street Advisory, to implement at no fee for 6 months. We will put in the governance you declined, shepherd the changes you balked at, and hand you the metrics your board keeps asking to see. Yvonne blinked. At no fee. Your board doesn't care about your vindication, I said. They care about your margin. You can spend a year paying lawyers to produce a judgment against a company that now has neither cash nor capacity, or you can spend half that time with people who will fix the thing that made you angry. Rowan leaned back, index finger steepled. Why would you help us? He said. Not quite a question when Whitaker and Partners is run by your family. Because I no longer have a family in that business, I said. And because the work still matters. The optics, the junior lawyer said, flushing as all brave young men do, when they hear themselves speak in a room like this, could be interpreted as an end run around liability. Then interpret them as competence, I said. You hired Whitaker for judgment. My judgment is that this is salvageable, and that salvaging it is faster than suing it. Rowan didn't move for a long moment. Through the glass, I could see a groundskeeper coaxing a reluctant Fountain awake. Finally, Rowan closed the blue book and placed both hands on it as if officiating a quiet oath. How long does your offer stand, he said. Until 5 p.m. tomorrow, I said. At 5:01, all I can recommend to anyone is litigation. He nodded once. We'll be in touch. Outside, the sky was the soft color of paper. I sat in my car and let the air conditioner fake an alpine breeze until the knot between my shoulders unhooked itself. By lunchtime, the first answer arrived from my people. Sloan, I'm in. An hour later, Geeta. If we do this, we do it correctly. Give me keys and a password. Benji wrote a 2-sentence email about guardrails and ethics, and then added a 3rd sentence that simply said yes. I met May back at the building and signed the lease with a pen that had somehow survived my entire career. We walked through the corner suite while the afternoon spread its honey across the carpet. I opened a window that probably wasn't meant to open and let the real world rush in. Your coffee machine thinks it's Italian, May said, tapping the abandoned chrome. Let it dream, I said. Friday hurried its hours. At 9, an email from CityLine to Whitaker and Partners formally notified them of the frozen line. At 10, Lila called, not brittle now, just thin. They won't extend the revolver, she said. They said something about litigation exposure and governance instability. I don't even know what those mean. They mean the bank is afraid, I said, and they prefer calm borrowers. What do we do about payroll, she asked. I let the question hang in the air for a moment like a picture crooked on a wall. You'll need to make choices, I said, soon. At noon, 2 cardboard boxes arrived at Harbor Street with new laptops inside, and a blessing from Marta's friend in IT procurement. I set them on the improvised conference table, 2 desks shoved together, and wrote names on sticky notes. When Sloan walked in at 1, she picked up hers like a passport. Benji's parking, she said. Geeta is bringing a label maker. Then we are dangerous, I said. We spent the early afternoon building a small world Wi-Fi, shared drives a whiteboard that leaned because one of its legs was shorter than the others. I wrote 3 client names in a column and left the rest of the board blank on purpose. Blank space asks for courage. At 3:30, Daniel texted, Mom, can we meet? Not today, I replied. I wasn't unkind about it. I wasn't kind either. At 4:11, Yvonne sent a 2-line message. We are reviewing internally. Lawyers love those 2 lines. They can be stretched across any number of possibilities. At 4:39, the building's AC sputtered into an apology. Sloan propped the door with a copy paper box and passed around bottles of water. The office smelled faintly of cardboard and ambition. I checked that my phone's ringer was on. At 4:47 it rang. Rowan, he said, dispensing with hello the way men do when they have decided a thing and must say it before they change their minds. We will withdraw the demand letter effective Monday morning. Send over the engagement letter for 6 months of implementation, fee waived as you proposed. Yes, I said, and let the word rest between us without embroidery. And Joe, he added. Yes. Bring the blue book when we start. I want my managers to read their signatures out loud. Gladly, I said. When I ended the call, Sloane looked up from a tangle of cables. Good news. Work, I said, the honest kind. Benji let out a breath I suspect he'd been holding for a year. Gita labeled a drawer policy because of course she did. I forwarded Rowan's acceptance to Marta with a subject line that read, "Only begin." I went to the window and held the sill with both hands. The city ran its late afternoon errands beneath us. An old man in a red cap fed a sandwich crust to a gull that had no intention of pretending gratitude. A bus sighed. Somewhere a trumpet practiced scales and missed a note and then found it. The office was too quiet for celebration and too loud for reflection. It felt like a bridge. At 5:03, another email arrived. This one not for me. Lila had sent a company-wide message from her new address at Whitaker & Partners' temporary update on accounts payable. The body contained reassurances in passive voice about timing and transitions, and a phrase about prudent stewardship that I had once used and now regretted donating to the world. Sloane read it over my shoulder and said nothing at all, which was kinder than any commentary. I shut down my computer, slid the shears I kept in my tote back into their sleeve, and locked the office. As we walked to the elevator, the three of us moved like people who had chosen something together and were still testing the fit. In the parking lot, the evening air was warm enough to make a promise without keeping it. I stood by my car for a minute and listened to the sound a city makes when it changes its mind. Then I drove home across the water where the tide had turned without asking anyone's permission. The kitchen was as I'd left it, blue book on the counter, roses in a jar, the kettle waiting for purpose. I set my keys in their dish and sat. The house breathed as houses do. The phone stayed still. In the quiet, I wrote one more list, not facts, not postures, not remedies, but names. People who had stood beside me when the floor tried to tilt. People who had taught me not to disgrace my luck. I capped the pen and left the paper there uncovered. The evening took its time settling around everything it could not alter. Outside along the fence, the climbing rose had opened a second bloom. It faced the neighbor's yard, which felt right enough. Not everything bright belongs to the person who fostered it. Some things simply insist on their own direction. I washed the coffee cups, turned the kettle on, and waited for the whistle. The blue book still lay on my counter when I woke. The kettle performed its small, useful thunder. By the time I reached Harbor Street, the office smelled of cardboard and coffee and the decisive optimism of new passwords. Sloane had drawn a timeline on the whiteboard, tidy as a metronome. Benji crouched beneath a desk, coaxing a network switch towards civility. Gita labeled drawers with a satisfaction that could anchor a ship. At 10, the elevator sighed and released Daniel into the corridor. He'd lost the crispness he wore like armor. His tie was a concession, his hair a rumor of the person he wanted to be. "Mom," he said in the doorway. "Joe," I said, because in this room I insisted on accuracy. He sat without being offered a chair. Kestrel pulled the letter, he said. "They told me. They're working with you." "They are," I said. "Payroll is 7 days," he added, as though arithmetic could rebrand desperation. "Vendors are calling. CityLine sent a formal freeze notice. Lila wants to negotiate with them directly, but they asked for audited statements and a cash flow forecast, and..." He swallowed. "We don't have anyone who can make those in a way a bank trusts." "You had someone yesterday," I said. He flinched because the truth is a blunt instrument when it's spoken quietly. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "I thought I did. I thought it would be simpler." "I know," I said. He stared at his hands. "I need a job." Sloane's keyboard halted in the next room, then resumed polite as a closed door. "I have work," I said. "Compliance and contract hygiene. It is not litigation. It is not glamorous. It pays half of what you made last year. You will report to Gita. You will not call me Mom here." He nodded as if the word humiliation had a pulse you could steady by agreeing to it. "And Lila, there is no role for Lila," I said. He sat straighter, then collapsed a little, then found something that looked like spine. "I'll take it." I slid an envelope across the desk. He read it line by line because he has always been a person who believes the trap sits between sentences instead of being the sentence itself. When he reached the signature block, he looked up. "This doesn't make us even," he said. "It doesn't make us anything," I said. "It lets you work." He signed. I countersigned. We shook hands, not warm, not cold, the business of two people agreeing to behave. He left with a laptop and a credential sheet. Gita watched him pass her desk, said nothing, and handed him a laminated badge I hadn't realized she'd already printed. When the elevator closed, she turned to me. "Guardrails," she said. "Steel," I said. By evening, I had a message from an unknown number whose prose style I would have recognized if it had been set in hieroglyphs. "You think this makes you a hero. You think you can humiliate us. Careful who you try to bury. Some of us are hard to keep down. L." I put the phone face down and watered the basil. Threats like weeds enjoy attention. It took 40 hours for the retaliation to arrive. On Tuesday morning at 8:17, 2 officers stood in the lobby downstairs, uniforms tidier than the building deserved. They asked my name, asked it again, then asked me to extend my hands. Ms. Whitaker, the taller one, said not unkind. You're under arrest for financial exploitation of an elder and fraud. I am the elder, I said. That's what the paperwork says, he said, apologetic as a man holding an unpleasant cake. You have the right to remain silent. I let them finish the lines the law requires and did exactly as advised aside from requesting a call. On the way out, I caught Sloane's eye through the glass. She didn't come running. She didn't perform. She simply stood and lifted her phone with one eyebrow. I nodded and she began to dial. The precinct smelled faintly of bleach-old coffee and the decisions people make when they believe no one is watching. My attorney Arjun Menon arrived with his tie askew and the kind of breath that always reads as cinnamon in rooms like these. He was spare, precise, allergic to theatrics. They're charging you, he said, opening his slim briefcase. Affidavit alleges you moved money from Whitaker and Partners into personal accounts in anticipation of a transfer you knew was imminent. There are emails to your accountant from 3 days before the dinner. There are phone logs to CityLine. There is a sworn statement from your son that you were unusually accommodating when asked you to sign. Daniel, I said. The word felt like a door. Arjun lifted a hand. Do not react to that in public. We will address the evidence as evidence. You were the sole owner. That matters. Intent also matters. The prosecutor thinks she can frame this as a fraudulent conveyance moving assets to impede lawful access by the new owners. It is an imaginative theory, and she will attempt to hang it on those emails. And Lila, I said. She filed the complaint, he said. Her statement connects your transfers to a supposed pattern of confusion. She suggested early cognitive decline. She attached a letter from Dr. Kumar recommending reduced stress and a step back from complex decisions. He never examined my cognition, I said. She brokered that letter over wine and adjectives. I don't need the adjectives, Arjun said. I need the nouns. Recordings, I said. He looked up. I began months ago, when she first started practicing the word forgetful in front of witnesses. 6 months of dinners and car rides and whispered instructions. The ultimatum at the table. The part where she says a judge will protect me by restraining me. The plan to gather affidavits. The script for Dr. Kumar. You have these, he said, not quite a question. Compressed, labeled. Backed up in 3 places. Marta held the encryption key until last night. He closed his briefcase. Then we will hold your arraignment. We will ask for a high but reasonable bail. And we will perform a small magic trick. We will teach the court the difference between a narrative and proof. Judge Keating presided with the weary grace of a woman who understood that people bring their catastrophes to her room and ask to be rearranged into something they can survive. The prosecutor, ADA Elena Park, had a posture that could slice paper. She recited the charges with professional artistry. Her voice made the words sound inevitable. When it was our turn, Arjun rose like a quiet weather change. He did not thunder. He did not seduce. He pointed to terms ownership, authorization, fiduciary duty, and let their reality occupy the space. Then he set his hand on the lectern. Your Honor. He said the complainant has portrayed Ms. Whitaker as both predator and incompetent. As a matter of logic, those are difficult to reconcile. As a matter of fact, we will supply recordings made by Ms. Whitaker over the last 6 months, demonstrating coercion, explicit threats of guardianship to gain control of assets, and a plan articulated by the complainant to have Ms. Whitaker declared incapable absent medical basis. We request that law enforcement review these materials immediately. Judge Keating studied Arjun, then me, Ms. Park. The ADA hesitated 1 heartbeat too, and in that space, the notion of certainty performed a small stumble. We would, of course, review any proffered evidence, she said, but the state believes the charges are appropriate. We request bail at 100,000. 50, Arjun said, still mild. 75, the judge ruled, gravel discreet in her voice. She signed, and the system printed its rituals. By evening, I was at my kitchen table with an ankle monitor and my basil, while 2 detectives occupied my living room with laptops and expressions calibrated to skeptical curiosity. Detective Valerie Hale did the talking. Her partner Dominguez did the watching. I slid a drive across the table. Passwords on the card, I said. The file names are dates. Some dates have subfolders because we cooked and then argued. Helly's eyed me over the top of her readers. You recorded your family. I recorded the story they were trying to write me into, I said. She inclined her head at the candor and set to work. We listened together because sometimes the thing is to witness what you already know. There was Lila practicing Concern Joe. It would be such a relief for you not to carry this anymore. There was the edge. If you don't sign, the court will take this out of your hands. There was the stage direction whispered to Daniel when she thought I was in the pantry. Don't look at her when you say forgetful. It breaks the spell. There were emails read aloud, dictated threats, rehearsals for the scene at the table. There was a plan crisp as a checklist to solicit statements from neighbors about my confusion the time I waved at the mailman and misremembered his route by a block. Hale removed her glasses, pinched the bridge of her nose, and put them back on. "We'll need a statement," she said. "We'll need to talk to Dr. Kumar. He'll tell you she brought muffins," I said. She called it a community concern. "People like muffins," Dominguez said, which was his way of saying he understood exactly how friendship and food can launder a lie. By Thursday, the city's air had a shine it didn't deserve. Hale called to say a judge had approved warrants for Lila Vale and Daniel Whitaker on suspicion of attempted coercion conspiracy and filing a false report. The press learned just enough to make a headline and not enough to tell a story. I turned off the television because speculation is an unhelpful meal. That afternoon, the phone rang with a number I could have dialed asleep. "Mom," Daniel said, voice shredded. "We saw Hale talk to me. Lila thinks we should leave for a while." "Where are you?" I asked. "I can't say." "You just did," I said, because the sound of a bus terminal is different from a living room. "Don't run." "I signed your statement," he blurted. "I know," I said. "I thought if I seemed cooperative they'd—" I don't know what I thought. Paper rustled, a woman's voice filtered through like a serration. Lila's shape was obvious even when you couldn't make out words. "She says you're manipulative," he added a practiced cadence that made my heart ache, because it was a child's echo of an adult's script. "I am careful," I said. "I am old. I'm old. I am not your enemy." Silence thinned to a thread. "I don't know how to climb out of this." "You put your feet where the ground is," I said. The line went dead. Hale called an hour later. "They're moving," she said. "We traced activity to a storage facility off Crowley. You know it. 6 months ago, she told Daniel she needed space for seasonal decor," I said. I told him I'd never known a wreath to require a padlock. Hale's team executed the warrant. The unit held precisely what I expected and precisely what I didn't: banker's boxes labeled in Lila's neat accountant's hand, client invoices AR, AP, HR mixed with 3 Samsonite cases containing an uninspired attempt at cash. $42,000 that smelled like detergent and cowardice. Skimmed, Hale asked. Diverted, I said. She built vendor entities that sounded like suppliers and were mostly P.O. box dust. They also found a folder titled Doctors, with printouts articles on geriatric assessment, a template for a petition for guardianship in our county, notes from a seminar on navigating difficult elders where a speaker had offered an unfortunate mnemonic. I closed the folder and washed my hands because paper can feel unclean. That night, my doorbell rang at 7. Sloan had warned me she would stop by with forms. Instead, on my porch stood a young woman with Lila's hair and none of her temperature. "I'm Erin," she said, gripping the strap of a canvas tote. "Lila's sister." I stepped aside. She sat at the edge of a chair like a bird who hasn't decided if the windows are real. She called me Erin said. "Yesterday, she wanted money wired to a bank in Zurich. I told her I didn't have it." She said. Erin halted and found the rest of the sentence as though clearing brush. "She said she'd make you pay regardless. She said, if I can't ruin her in court, I'll do it some other way." Erin slid her phone across my table. The screen held a thread of messages, each bubble an excavation. I read the words that wished me gone, the ones that sketched proximity and opportunity, the ones that made the officers in my living room sit forward at the same time. "We need to move you," Hale said, standing before she finished reading. The safe apartment they chose had a view of a parking garage and the light bulbs of a stairwell that contemplated verbs like flicker and buzz. An FBI agent named Maya Rios checked the windows, the smoke detectors, the places people imagine danger lives because TV taught them so. Agent Rios wore her hair pulled back and her pragmatism like a field. "We'll rotate cars," she said. "No routine. If she is impulsive, that's one scenario. If she is methodical, that's another. Either way, you won't be porous." "Do you have children?" I asked, because sometimes the shortest way to understand a guardian is to see where she points her fear. "A son," she said. 7. He hates carrots. We did not speak of what people do when they are cornered. We watched a game show on low volume because answers in neat boxes are a comfort even when you don't care for the questions. On Monday morning, Daniel walked into the precinct lobby at 9 and asked for Detective Hale by name. He looked like all the men who had ever been told they were the best and had believed it until the first serious collision. I sat behind glass while he spoke because honesty requested witnesses and the heart requested distance. He talked for 4 hours. He began with a small life, his ours, and then built the scaffolding Lila had insisted would keep her high and everyone else below. He did not spare himself. He described the way she had narrated me to him, a woman who was slipping, a burden wrapped in competence, the risk that would define his legacy if he didn't act. He described the muffins the neighbors Dr. Kumar's letter typed with friendly certainty and zero testing. He described Plan B, the petition for emergency guardianship drafted and filed in a folder on her desktop beneath another folder labeled Recipes. The forms for involuntary psychiatric evaluation already filled with adjectives. He described how she rehearsed her testimony in front of the bathroom mirror, moderate tears, low voice. married to a conviction that always sounded like love to an untrained ear. He provided account numbers for the shell vendors, the name of the notary she preferred because she never reads. He listed passwords he could remember because even the unscrupulous tire of inventing new phrases for the same old doors. When he finished, Hale didn't speak immediately. She let the room be a room again. "You're going to be charged," she said finally, not unkind. "Your cooperation changes what that looks like." "I know," he said. In the corridor, he paused when he saw me behind the glass. I stepped into the doorway because pretending we were elsewhere would have been its own kind of lie. "Joe," he said. "Daniel," I said. He looked at my ankle monitor, then at the ceiling, because some shame still knows how to avoid a mother's face. I told them everything. "I heard," I said. "Can you?" He stopped. He tried another route. "You were a good mother to a boy I haven't been in a long time." "I was a decent mother to a stubborn boy," I said. "And then you became a man, and I kept believing you'd turn toward yourself." "I'd like to," he said, voice small as a match. "I have conditions," I said. He smiled in spite of whatever it cost to do so. "Of course you do." "You will work," I said. "You will see a doctor who teaches grown men how to hear the word no without confusing it with abandonment. You will tell the truth until your tongue recognizes it before your mind does. You will not ask me to rescue you from the pieces of this that belong to you." He nodded. "Can I at least offer to carry your groceries again?" "You may offer," I said, and he understood that some repairs begin at the size of ordinary. When he left to be processed, Agent Rios appeared in the doorway. "We have enough," she said. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is drafting. If Lila crosses a border, I have colleagues who will make her feel undignified in a way she remembers." "Erin," I asked. "We've taken her statement," Rios said. "She's scared and also furious in the productive way. She'll be okay." I went back to Harbor Street in the afternoon because work is one of the few ways to ask your hands to calm your chest. The office had acquired a hum, a printer, a stubborn chair, a cluster of voices learning the topography of one another again. Sloan passed me a status sheet without commentary. Benji asked for 2 signatures and a judgment call. Gita told me the label maker was running low on tape, and then waited for me to laugh before she did. On my desk lay a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was Daniel's when he was 12, unpracticed confidence. "Thank you for making the work about the work. D." I put the note in the drawer where I kept the small things that had once kept me from giving up. In the evening, I stood at the fence and considered whether to cut the 3rd rose. I left it. Some flowers are better as promises to no one in particular. The house held its breath the way houses do when the people inside are learning what they can live with. The kettle sang once and fell quiet. The phone didn't ring. The blue book still rested on the counter, soft cover, uncreased, patient, as if it knew it would be needed again, but wasn't eager to be important. I washed my hands. I turned out the light. I slept. In the morning, Agent Rios texted from a number she said I could use after hours. "We've put out notices. Keep your routine unpredictable. Call me if anything breaks pattern." I replied with a thumbs up and then corrected myself by writing understood. At 9, the door to Harbor Street opened and Daniel stepped in with a plain cardboard box. He set it on Benji's desk and raised both hands like a citizen. "Policies," he said. "Old and new. I'll index." Benji handed him a label maker. Gita pointed to a chair. Sloan kept typing. None of us performed forgiveness. We simply located the tasks that keep the day intact. By noon, 3 clients had answered emails with the tone people use when they've decided to pick competency over chaos. At 2, Rowan forwarded me a calendar invitation with the subject line Governance Kickoff. At 4, CityLine called to confirm a meeting. Their vice president wanted to see our faces, take our temperature, determine whether our pulse justified oxygen. In the late afternoon, I walked to the corner and bought fruit from a grocer who always tucked an extra plum into my bag in violation of his own ledger. He asked about the ankle bracelet without malice. I told him it made my shoes look modern. Back home, I cut a peach with a knife that had been my mother's and sat at the counter where all of this had begun and refused to end. I ate the fruit over the sink because juice is unruly and some days you practice mercy by making fewer messes for yourself. The rose at the fence unfurled the rest of itself in the last light. The air held the faint metallic promise of rain that may or may not bother to arrive. I let the window stand open anyway. Some risks are only air moving through a room. I set the knife down. I waited for the kettle. I listened to the house remember me. The rain arrived at dawn, quiet and thorough, as if the city had decided to rinse itself. I was buttering toast when Agent Rios called. "We have her," she said. "Geneva." Public Wi-Fi came in portal. Wrong instinct. Swiss police made the arrest. She'll wave if her attorney believes the alternatives. I set the knife down. The house seemed to steady. Extradition shrank an ocean into a hallway. 2 weeks later, a chain of officers handed Lila Vale from Jetbridge to unmarked sedan with the choreographed indifference of people who move problems for a living. She stepped into the courthouse pale and furious, her hair pinned into a version of order that fooled no one. Arraignment was routine. Charges read. Counsel entered. Bail denied. She stared at me once as they turned her toward the door, and in that look I recognized the theft that had always interested her most, the kind that takes dignity from other people and kneads it into your own. The trial began on a Monday. Judge Keating presided. A jury of 12 turned toward whoever spoke with the animal concentration of people asked to share the weight of a fact. The state opened with numbers and paperwork, the vendor shells, the diverted invoices, the bank statements that had been patient enough to wait for their turn. 8A Park called Detective Hale, who walked the jury through the storage unit photograph by photograph, the tidy labels that pretended to be virtue, the suitcases that smelled faintly of laundry soap and panic. Then the recordings entered timestamps, transcripts of voice that practiced concern and then slipped into threat between vowels. In one segment, the jury heard Lila instruct Daniel not to hold my eye when he said the word forgetful. In another, she rehearsed the phrase step back from complexity until it sounded like a pillow. The room did not change temperature, but it felt colder. The defense selected a story that could be told with a straight back, worried daughter-in-law, erratic elder responsible intervention. They called Dr. Kumar, who cleared his throat and admitted there had been no cognitive testing, only conversation and a letter drafted to reduce stress. They called a neighbor who had once seen me stand at the curb longer than a person usually stands at a curb. They said I was vindictive and controlling and had staged my own salvation. When Lila took the stand, she adjusted the microphone with steady fingers. She was very good at sounding reasonable. She framed each decision as care, each lie as a misremembering, each diversion as temporary stewardship. When A Park placed one of the recordings in front of her and asked if the voice was hers, she smiled without showing teeth. I was frightened for my family, she said. I used clumsy words. Park paced, no steps, asked no trick questions. Page 23, she said, handing up a transcript. Read the line after guardianship. Lila read. The room heard, once we control it, we can unwind her mess and keep the parts worth keeping. The court reporter's keys copied the sentence with the neutrality of a mirror. Daniel testified on a Wednesday. He wore a dark suit that fit like a confession. He did not look at Lila. He told the truth with the halting steadiness of a person who had at last decided not to save face at the expense of breath. He described the muffins and the whispers the letter typed without tests, the folders labeled recipes that contained documents no kitchen requires. He admitted his part without minimizing it. He explained without asking for sympathy what it is to live with a vocabulary someone else placed in your mouth. Cross-examination prodded at his motive until it became tedious. You benefit from cooperating, the defense said. You hope to avoid prison. I hope to stop lying, he said, and for once no one objected to an answer's brevity. On Friday morning, the defense tried one last pivot. If Lila could not be a savior, perhaps she was merely sloppy. If not sloppy, misunderstood. Park let the pivot spin on its own axis. She returned to the tapes, to the bank trails, to the boilerplate in the false police report that still carried Lila's habit of doubling adjectives when she felt clever. She asked few questions and did not raise her voice. The jury watched the evidence do its work. They were out less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreperson read each count in a voice that belonged to no one and everyone: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, filing a false report, elder exploitation. Guilty, 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 guilty. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Keating's tone was spare and unsentimental. You mistook control for care, she said at the end, and then the numbers followed: 15 years with no possibility of parole until 7 had been lived and counted. Lila did not cry. She glanced toward our row, seeking the version of me who would flinch. I did not offer her that gift. The courthouse exhaled us onto the steps, lawyers already on their phones, reporters angling for angles, a breeze intent on being ordinary. Daniel stood beside me with his hands in his pockets the way he had when he was 12, and everything still felt salvageable. What now, he said, catching himself and shifting. Sorry, that isn't your job. It's a sentence, I said, not a syllabus. He nodded. We walked down the stairs and did not look back. Harbor Street learned how to be itself. Work arrived in the compact, necessary way work does when people decide competence is a quieter shelter than drama. Carla from CityLine came to view our ledgers and left with notes and a softened mouth. Rowan's governance kickoff filled a conference room with managers who read the blue book aloud, signature by signature, silent as children in church. We built committees that met when they said they would. We stood up dashboards that did not flatter. Results then confidence, not the other way around. By the end of 6 months, there were 15 names on payroll, and each one knew why the lights came on. Sloane moved through the office with a pencil behind her ear and a schedule in her head that had room for interruptions without collapsing. Benji put guardrails in places no one sees and saved us 3 disasters we don't have to count. Geeta adopted a new label maker with a zeal that would have embarrassed other people and did not embarrass her. Daniel kept the job he had said yes to: compliance, contract, hygiene, disciplined boredom that keeps risk at bay. He arrived early, left late, and began slowly to let responsibility live in his bones instead of on his tongue. On Thursdays after work, he walked 2 blocks to sit with a therapist who did not care that he used to be impressive and did not flinch when he admitted he had been cruel. He brought me no progress reports. He stopped asking me to grade him. One afternoon, months after the verdict, CityLine's vice president shook my hand at the end of a review and said, "Borrowers like you make us look smart." I resisted the temptation to correct him. The ledger knows who did the labor. At home, the ankle monitor had long since been removed. Its faint bracelet mark faded like a ring line after dishes. The roses along the fence grew unruly in August and begged for correction. I trimmed and watered until the garden understood it could be more than ornamental. A letter arrived from the Department of Corrections acknowledging receipt of a victim impact statement I had not written. I put it in the drawer with other documents that had believed themselves important once. Another envelope held a copy of the final order dismissing the charges against me. I tucked that one behind a framed photo of my husband and called it even. On a late Friday, when the office emptied with the relief people earned, Daniel paused in my doorway. He did not enter. He practiced boundaries the way other people practice scales. "Joe," he said. "Daniel, I would like to take Sunday dinner," he said. "Roast chicken, no speeches." He hesitated, then added, "I'll bring the carrots." I let the corner of my mouth rise because the memory landed softly. 7, I said. "Don't be late." He nodded and left. The light through the window laid a gentle geography across my desk. I closed my laptop, took the shears from their drawer, and headed home. The house was exactly the right size. I set fruit in a bowl, rinsed parsley, turned the radio to a station that played a trumpet quietly. In the backyard, a third bloom had opened where I'd refused to hurry it. It faced the neighbor's yard again. I let it. I made tea and stood at the sink with the window open to the evening. Somewhere past the fence, a child yelped at a sprinkler. A dog negotiated with a squirrel and lost. The kettle clicked as it cooled. On the counter, the blue book waited for Monday's meeting, like a professional who understands its place. I watched the cup dried. It turned off the light and let the house remember itself around me. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.